And I will be your host along with Amina, who's right here. I don't know if you can say hi, Amina.
Hello, everybody.
And she will be hosting the Kahoot session at the end of today's seminar. We also have with us our tech coordinator, so Suha, and also Emily, who's also there, who will make sure everything is running smoothly. Now, before starting, I want to thank you all for being here today with us. I also want to thank the huge team behind the organization of this event, as well as all our speakers for participating in the symposium. The main goal of the symposium is really all in its name. So we are going to be talking about migrant health. Why migrants? Because they are among the most vulnerable population in Canada, and they experience many barriers to access healthcare. Why migrants again? Because it's a unique population with their unique needs and also a population that is often misunderstood. Uh, Now, why are we making this symposium interprofessional? Because every single health worker or professional will see this population in their life. You're going to have to assess patients from this population. And if we are not equipped to assess their health and social need, nobody will, unfortunately. But above all, every healthcare professional is essential to be able to break those barriers that they're facing. So as you may have seen, the symposium will run through 5 weeks, and each week we will be exploring a different barrier and different topics. So today marked the first seminar of the symposium. I would also like to remind you that if you are registered for week 2, where we're going to have a language barrier workshop that will be held by Medcom, to please fill up the registration form that Amina will send right now in the chat. So basically what this workshop will be about is teaching multilingual students how they can act as medical interpreters. If you speak only French or English, it's totally fine, and you're more than welcome to participate. And lastly, the main goal is to provide you with tools to face language barriers as future healthcare professionals. So please take the time to fill this out. We really just want to know what languages you speak, and it should not take more than 2 minutes to fill it out. Now, moving on to some housekeeping points. So this is only for you to know, like before we get started and dive in these topics. The first one is that we will be monitoring the presence, and it's not to make this like as a classroom, not at all. It's really just so that we can give training certification to people that attend fully week 1, week 5, and another week of their choice. Also, when you attend the full day, you will be able to enter a raffle draw to win a 25 gift card of your choice. The second thing I want you to keep in mind is to please, if you have any question, feel free to ask them in the chat. You can either send them to everyone, or you can send it to one of the hosts if you wish to stay anonymous. The other thing is that I would like to ask you all to please stay unmuted throughout the seminar. I think someone is unmuted, I'm not sure, because I'm hearing some feedback, but if you can please stay unmuted throughout the seminar. And also you can feel free to put on or off your camera. It's really as you wish. And last and not least, after the first talk, we will have a break. We won't have a break. However, after the 2 other talk, we will have one. And I'll walk you throughout the seminar, and I'll let you know when we are having a break and when we need to come back. Most importantly, more than anything else, I hope you are going to have fun and enjoy the various talk of today's seminar. Now, moving on, I think we can finally get started with today's seminar, Introduction and Foundation, Navigating the Unknown, Challenges in the Healthcare System and Beyond. We will be starting with our first talk, which will walk us through challenges faced by newcomer in the COVID era. And I'm very happy and honored to announce our first guest speaker, Dr. Neil Area. So if I were to introduce you a little bit to Dr. Neil, he's a family physician in Kitchener, Ontario. He's also the chair of Pegasus Institute, which stands for Peace, Global Health and Sustainability. He's also in many academic positions in various universities in Ontario. He's also the past vice president of the International Physician for the Prevention of Nuclear War, who won the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. He also did research on various aspects of refugee health. And last but not least, he's the founder and director of the Kitchener Waterloo Refugee Clinic, where he helped develop the psychiatric outreach project providing mental health services to homeless people. Now, I'll leave the floor to you, Dr. Aria, and you can walk us through this talk.
Okay, well, thank you again for the introduction. I also see Dr. Chergwin on here, and we've been good friends for many years. I'm really impressed with the group of students that you have, that trying to develop anything interprofessional is difficult, and you've pulled off an amazing conference. I should also mention that I did my residency in Montreal at the CLSC Côte-des-Neiges and the Jewish General Hospital, and that was probably what got me interested in doing some of the stuff with newcomers. So we'll go through my slides. I know you wanted a bit more of an introduction to refugee and migrant health, even though you wanted to concentrate on asylum seekers. So I'll have a lot of general slides that hopefully will be what you were hoping for. So this is my slide. I hope everything's going well. So I am a family doctor. Oh, now it's not moving here. Oh, okay. So now, just setting the stage for what we're hoping to accomplish. I think you want a brief definition of refugees and migrants, a little bit about statistics, something about barriers faced in general, and how important it is to tailor care for this population, and a bit about the effect of COVID. I will have some resources for you at the end, so I'll probably share things as the PDF. We have an article that should be coming up in Canadian Family Physician in the next couple of months, where we describe how to treat things. And since you're an interprofessional group, you'd probably be interested in that. Tell you a bit about myself. I'm a child of immigrants. So this is back in the early 60s when I was born. My parents came there. You can see that there might have been some cultural differences with the average Canadian in small town British Columbia, where we first settled. But this is my mother's family in the 1950s. Both my parents were refugees or migrants from what became Pakistan to India, to New Delhi. They were, you could call them internally displaced. They could have been considered refugees, although refugees weren't recognized at that time. We also connected more with refugees, again, not seeing myself as being a child of one, back in 1972 when Idi Amin kicked out Asians from Uganda, and some of them settled in the town where we were living in Grey Bruce County in Ontario. My wife Carolyn has worked with MSF in South Sudan, and both of us have worked with refugees then too in our clinic here. So this just represents a little bit about migrants in various places. I think you're going to have other people, somebody from UNHCR talking about the definition of a refugee, but it doesn't hurt to repeat that. So a refugee, according to the 1951 convention, and this is from the 2010 UN Convention and Protocol, is someone who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside of, and again, this is 1951, so it's his nationality, and unable to, or owing to such fear, unwilling to avail himself of the protection of his country. Sorry, I just have to take this off. Yeah, so this is from the 1951 convention. You can see that this excludes certain people. It certainly excludes economic migrants, even environmental migrants, but I know they will talk to you more about that later. How many people are refugees? According to this slide, we have almost 80 million people at the end of 2019 who were forcibly displaced. Of those, 2/3 were internally displaced and about 1/3 were considered refugees. Palestinians have been considered somewhat separate from other refugees for historical reasons, and they have the UN Refugee Works rather than the United Nations High Commission on Refugees looking after some of their interests, and Venezuelans also are considered separate. You see that the numbers have increased over a period of time. And where are refugees hosted and where did they come from? I think you can see my cursor, but let me know if you don't. So now a major number from Syria. Venezuela, as I said, provides a fair number now. And these numbers change every couple of years with various crises. Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar among the top source countries. And you see that the hosting countries are often the neighboring countries. So Syrians largely going to Turkey. There were also Iraqis going there. Syria, in fact, used to take refugees from Iraq, for instance, in large numbers. In Venezuela, many people going to Colombia. Colombia has a number of internally displaced people, as it is. It has over the years. In Afghanistan, people largely going to Pakistan, and South Sudan, going to Uganda. So I'll show another map of things, but 1% of the world's population is considered to be displaced. And a very small number of those actually come to other countries, as we'll see. So looking at this, looking at where people are coming from, you see the dark blue having Syria, Afghanistan, and then Iran, Iraq. So that area, the Middle East, a large source. Then the Horn of Africa and a bit of Sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, another source. Over here in Burma, a major source, and then finally in Venezuela now, we have a large source of refugees. And then the internally displaced are also in this next slide. So again, as I mentioned, Colombia has a lot of people internally displaced, but yeah, even in Syria, at more than 6 million internally displaced within Syria, compared to the number who actually go out of country. So when we think about people who have to flee, they're largely in their own country, a few just outside on the borders, and very few who actually make it to the global north or west. Germany, as I'll show in subsequent slides, has a lot of people because of how people have perceived Germany. But in terms of refugees per capita, Lebanon has more than 15% of the people within its borders who are refugees. They've had a number of Palestinians over the years, but now the Syrians in particular, but Jordan, Turkey have a substantial portion of their population, and not all is going to be funded by people from the global north or the UN. Where do refugees travel from? So from Burma, where you have different ethnic groups which have felt persecuted even prior to the military coup recently, they again go through Asia, going to Thailand, going to Malaysia. A few try to make it further away to Australia and in other countries in the West. But basically, Australia keeps people away from their borders in Nauru and Palau, neighboring countries that they have agreements with, so they intercept their ships and put them basically behind fences. This is a drawing from a child who's experienced that and talking about all the suffering that they have, seeing the fences on a daily basis, her mother being pregnant, and everybody being sad. So this is a shame that one would say Australia has, but we in the global north actually share that throughout. The ones from the Middle East, largely if they're going to try to get out, they try to use the sea route, but the shortest sea route, often going through Greece. The ones from East Africa and the Horn of Africa, largely trying again to go through Greece, but also a bit through Italy, and then from West Africa, Spain and Italy. So we will see different migration patterns. And then people from those areas in the Middle East and Africa, as I said, Germany is a major host, Sweden also. But we've seen many of the countries which are lesser hosts even more afraid of refugees and asylum seekers. And in Eastern Europe in particular, but really throughout Europe, people are afraid of having refugees. The EU ended up having an agreement with Turkey so that they would prevent people from moving beyond Turkey by providing some funds and other support. But many people still try to go through the Mediterranean Sea. And last year you had about 3,000 people die trying to cross into Europe from the Mediterranean. This is from 2017, so the figures are a little bit less, but people are continuing to die. Countries continue to, again, try to stop the ships from coming, and some countries have laws against trying to rescue refugees at sea. And then within the Americas, many of you have heard of the caravans coming from Guatemala, or actually from further south in El Salvador and Honduras, which where people are suffering from gang warfare and other threats, and then coming through Mexico to the US-Mexican border. And again, the US trying to place higher walls and keep people out. So many of us have been trying to keep people out, but basically in terms of resettling refugees, and again, the ones going through Europe, the ones through Germany aren't resettled refugees, but Canada, Australia, the Nordic countries and the US have actually said we will resettle refugees who don't actually come to our border. And so Canada is among the ones that resettle the most, taking many more than the US in the last few years. The US actually did take more in absolute numbers prior to Donald Trump. And Joe Biden does say that they are planning on taking more, but we have resettled a number of refugees in the last couple of years. 2020, we did not resettle as many because of the pandemic, of course, which prevented a lot of migration. So you wanted a bit of an understanding of who refugees and migrants were. So refugees are that we've talked about are people who've applied from abroad and the claim was accepted by Canada, and they've also been accepted by the UN as being refugees. Government assisted refugees are sponsored by the federal government. Privately sponsored refugees are sponsored by non-governmental organizations or groups of community members who accept responsibility for resettlement. So the government still looks after healthcare for privately sponsored, but most of the other basic social needs for the first year, the privately sponsored NGOs, churches, groups of 5 with the Syrian response accepted responsibility for resettlement that the government would otherwise do. And then these other 2 categories are smaller, which is a blended formula. In terms of numbers that we've wanted to have, again, you can take a look at this slide later, but primarily the government has wanted to have about 10,000 refugees in the last couple of years that they would sponsor, and 20,000 that would be privately sponsored. Last year, that number ended up being halved. And so most of them coming in before March, and we had a few come in from September to December, but it was more of a trickle compared to what was expected. And again, we've just started to open up with the pandemic, so our numbers have been much less than were expected. This slide is from our paper that may be a Canadian Family Physician. Again, we defined refugees here, the government assisted and privately sponsored, but I wanted you to see that refugees have access to the resettlement programs that we'll talk about later. The government assisted, again, that the government provides, and privately sponsored that their hosts provide. And they have a healthcare coverage right when they arrive. And in fact, in Ontario, they're also entitled to the provincial healthcare coverage from day one, if they can go and apply for that. But the federal government provides healthcare coverage. Refugee claimants or asylum seekers, which you're going to concentrate on in much of the succeeding presentations, make a claim for protection upon or after arrival in Canada, and they may wait a couple of years for their hearings, and with the pandemic they actually have had to wait a little bit longer often. And they receive coverage also from the federal government, but face greater barriers to social and health services. Undocumented migrants are people who are not granted or no longer granted permission to reside in Canada, whether they enter the country regularly or irregularly. And these people often work under the table and have very little access to government or social support, and more limited to healthcare. Temporary foreign workers, which you hear about, aren't refugees at all. These are people invited in Canada and receive some insurance, but they have become important during the pandemic. So as I said, this is a slide more related to Ontario because I use OHIP here, the Ontario Health Insurance Plan. But the types of services that are covered for refugees by the Interim Federal Health Benefit Program include dental and visual care, psychotherapy by psychologists or others, speech therapy, midwifery services, physio, occupational therapy, audiology, home care, long-term care, and most medications and medical supplies. Refugee claimants, I'll skip through this slide, actually, it's not so important. The financial support of refugees, again, a year of financial support and access to services to help with education, housing, healthcare needs, understanding how banking works, understanding how toilets work, and then the privately sponsored, again, the sponsors commit to supporting people for a year. And what type of support do people get? And this is from about 5 years ago. We said a single adult will get about $700 per month. And then 2 adults together would get $840. So much of the support meant towards rent. And then you would get benefits for children. So it's not a lot of money if you look at each of you, if you're outside, if you're not living with your parents, what you would be paying for if you were in an apartment in Montreal. And this is especially tough for single and large families. Refugees are settled all across Canada. And so service provider organizations are all across Canada, including in the north, Whitehorse, Yellowknife, and people have come throughout. In Kitchener, the organization that we work with, because our clinic deals with government-assisted refugees, is Reception House, and their reception centers, as I said, across the country, funded by Citizenship and Immigration Canada. And they provide resettlement support, life skills support, and financial support. We had a paper back in about 2013 talking about the use of our clinic after the first few years. And we showed that we actually decreased barriers, placed people with primary care. So within healthcare, we can actually be quite useful. So the barriers, what type of barriers do refugees face? We classified them into individual barriers, institutional barriers, and system level barriers. Maybe higher, and Canada has not had burden of disease preventing refugees for coming for the last 20 years or so. Before they said, oh, you might not really adapt as well to Canada, or you might be too much of a barrier, stay where you are. But we've said that we base refugee status on the basis of need. Their experience of trauma certainly will be a barrier, sometimes a barrier to learning. And then they have barriers in terms of managing transportation or logistics. But institutionally, we, as healthcare providers, often don't know what refugees are entitled to. Across the country, translation services are mixed. And even when people are entitled to services, often the provider doesn't know about that. We don't know about some of their complex diseases. We have issues with workflow, and sometimes when refugees come late because of their own barriers, we can't be so flexible, and we may not know about appropriate referrals. At a systems level, again, issues related to funding, issues developing trained professionals, and our systems are culturally bound in different ways, and we often lack coordination and are rigid in terms of how we view things, and you can't with this population, especially with asylum seekers. So again, at each of these levels, there are financial issues, language is an issue, understanding the complexity of refugees is an issue, and then there are things that we have in terms of our system. So with our clinic, we actually tried to develop support services using systems brokers from Reception House and working with the community to provide social capital for refugees. So this was the model that we were working with. What do refugees do to the economy? And this is something that people have asked in Europe, but also in North America. And in Europe, there were some studies that showed that refugees actually could help the European economy, and particularly when you have an aging society like Germany. In Canada, that data is much more mixed. I could say that most of our refugees do want to be earning money and feeling productive. They aren't here just to live off of the rest of society. But as we've taken people who are more complex and some of the older people with the language barriers, not as many can find jobs right away. And so just over half of people might have had jobs in the last few years within 5 years of residence. And Canadian experience is required for many jobs preventing employment. So I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes about the politics of refugees. So back in about 2012 and 13, the Harper Conservative government saw refugees perhaps as a political wedge issue. And they said that, well, these people don't deserve the gold-plated healthcare when they come across the border. And this is something that they thought would resonate with people. Within 5 years, of course, we saw a sea change in how people viewed refugees, and I'll go over that story a little bit. So what the government did initially, they were saying that refugee claimants, many of the people you're going to be talking about, particularly from designated foreign countries, they would not be allowed for healthcare, even if they had a heart attack, that they wouldn't be covered. But as they crafted legislation, they included all classes of refugees. So even so it ended up being that there was some confusing legislation which said they'd only look after emergency care, even for others. And even of the people from the designated countries that they considered largely safe, you still had about a third of them from countries like Hungary and Mexico, where their claims eventually got accepted. So we felt that this was really quite unacceptable as refugee providers across the country, and I'll talk about that in a second. But refugees were considered threatening for many reasons by the majority of the population. I think I'm going to skip through this slide in the name of time, but in Germany, they tried to classify some of these threats, and there was a symbolic threat of refugee culture and religion as changing the dominant culture, the realistic threat related to job availability, and the safety threat that people were perceiving, leading to more negative attitudes towards refugees. But some of them were saying, oh, well, they're going to suffer from prejudice, they're not going to fit in with all of us. So these are things that many of us hold in our hearts. And we've held this for other marginalized groups. This is from a book that I co-edited on underserved populations, but we've done this with various groups. Again, not enough time to talk about this. So as healthcare providers, we organized different responses across the country, occupied cabinet ministers' offices, disrupted conferences, did stuff that really wasn't expected of providers, in particular physicians, and we got the government to reverse course, which they weren't really inclined to do, on the cuts to the interim federal health benefit plan, but they did it very quietly. They still tried to use this as a wedge issue in the election campaign in 2016. Kelly Leach, who was a physician, a cabinet minister, again said that she was the Northern Trump, and in the end they ended up being defeated, and we looked at having the new government saying that they were going to be very welcoming towards refugees. So after this culture war where they got people to combat barbaric cultural practices, supposedly. And in Quebec, I think we've seen these types of debates, and I think the whole issue of le voile, if I can try to be political, I do think that that represents a mistrust of foreigners.
Dr. Sorry to interrupt, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, yeah, we'll go quickly through this then. So Alan Kurdi, the boy who was found on the beach, helped change attitudes. With the Syrian response, the new government was very welcoming. The family on the right have become friends of mine. He's a gynecologist from Syria. This slide, in terms of the profile, you can go over yourselves if you want, but refugees were taken across the country, as I said. Our government-assisted refugees had larger families amongst the Syrians, many of them with no English and French, many of them with really no education and were illiterate even in Arabic, especially the men. And we had people from farmers and many labor type people who really were going to have trouble integrating. They were taken across the country. You wanted to know which places, Toronto being probably the largest, but Montreal having almost 20% of refugees, and most major Canadian cities taking more. Most of the refugees, you can look at this yourself. In Quebec, again, primarily Montreal and a lot privately sponsored, but mixed throughout. But even Outaouais didn't really have so many people. So primarily the Montreal area, much more than Quebec. In but we actually had to resettle a number in Ontario. The 852 of government-assisted refugees was about 3 times what we took in a year that we had to take in 3 months. So about 9 times the rate of things, and we had to develop various systems to dealing with that. We've done a study on integration of refugees with Michaela Henia from York University, with people across the country, including looking at in Quebec and looking at health and social integration. We've had a number of publications. Again, I won't go through this, but we tried to look at about 10% of 10 to 15% of the refugees who came, and we followed them for about 4 years. And I can talk about that if we have more time. Asylum seekers, talk about very briefly. Again, many coming across the Quebec-New York border or New England border in the last few years, again, fearful of how Donald Trump was, and the number of asylum claims increasing in 2017 and 18. You wondered about where people were coming from. So Mexico, Haiti, now that was in 2007, now Haiti and Nigeria, but a number from the US who make claims, and then other countries who've somehow got through the US. People, the numbers have really gone up. So about 64,000 claims. The CBSA is the one that deals with people coming across land borders. And many of those, much more coming through Quebec by land, but the ones who land by plane or other ways that we have more in Ontario, and Quebec have most of the refugees, have most of the asylum seekers. Again, you'll get numbers later. What has COVID done? COVID has really exacerbated inequities, as we say in our paper, that in Canadian Family Physician. With the first wave of COVID involving nursing homes and others, we found that newcomers were many more of the cases compared to the population of visible minorities or newcomers, but they were tested at a lower rate than the general population. So this is from a study from Gutman et al. And many have worked in frontline work with limited job protection and safety, live in high density housing, rely on public transportation, and also the temporary foreign workers, people working in food processing, were at higher risk. And again, our newcomers face barriers throughout the process. So they already had the systemic barriers I've talked about with disrupted education and livelihoods, but within Canada, they've had access to lack of access to resources, financial insecurity, precarious occupations. The larger family size represents more of a risk of COVID and decreased ability to isolate. When they travel by public transportation, that increased their risk. And then you have caregiving needs that people couldn't really isolate within the types of places where they were from their kids. You had barriers to accessing testing, the language discordance, the tech literacy, the digital divide that people face, and stigma within certain communities to testing. And then knowledge of where to get testing, the distance from places, transportation limits, and knowledge of various things. So they got worse care, less testing, and less ability to isolate. Social agencies, which were meant to support them, could only provide remote contact because of their own barriers. So our refugees and migrants faced a lot of barriers during COVID, and our refugees were stressed. Again, this is from a study with Michaela Henia from York that we were in, and we've just started to analyze the results. And we found the people who were most stressed were males, people requiring an interpreter, people who had more difficulty with finances and food, difficulty with social isolation, and surprisingly enough, having fewer people in the house predicted more stress. I'm not going to go through these slides about examples that we have to deal with those inequities, but open it up for a couple of minutes of questions if there are any. So hopefully.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aria, for your talk. And I think we'll unfortunately won't have time for question right now. But if you are willing to stay a little bit later, we might have time for that.
Okay, so I hope that this provided what you wanted, and thank you. And it's nice to speak to a group from Montreal.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Neil. So right now we're going to move to our next talk. So basically, the next talk that we will have will walk us through the timeline of the journey of an asylum seeker. And I'm very happy and honored to announce our next speaker, who is Dennis Otis. So Dennis Otis is a member of the Barreau du Québec since 1982. She's also the office manager for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee, that you might know as the acronym UNHCR, in Montreal since 2004. Before that, she was devoted to private practice, mainly in the field of refugee law. She represented the UNHCR multiple times with respect to Canadian law, policy, and practice affecting asylum seekers and refugees. And lastly, she has also been on 2 emergency humanitarian missions with the UNHCR in Sri Lanka and Egypt. Thank you so much once again, Dennis, for being with us today. And the floor is yours. You can take us away.
I think you are on mute. Yes.
Voila, here I am. This mute and unmute thing is like a nightmare for everyone, or a joke. So thank you very much for the invitation, because honestly, when I was practicing in representing asylum seekers before the tribunal that's called the Immigration Refugee Board, as a lawyer, I had fantastic support from various representatives of the health and social services, with doctors, for example, Dr. Pierre Dongier, and I wonder if Dr. Aria knows him, because this is where we're also in this Côte des Neiges that Dr. Dongier was practicing, as well as many social workers that I've worked with to better understand the circumstances of life and the health impact of these circumstances on these people, on the people that are seeking protection. I think that Dr. Aria fantastically set up the table. So there are a few things that I will probably skip from the presentation, but I will now go to put it on, let's see, on a slideshow to make it easier for you to see. Whoops, there we go. Voila. So we'll focus today on the asylum seekers, and I have put so in the summary that we'll go through some definitions. I know Dr. Aria did it, but I will refocus a little bit more on various people that UNHCR is taking care of internationally, and then we'll go straight ahead to the asylum system in Canada. I know that further down the road you will be meeting other people who would talk about it. So it's going to be a bit of a general introduction, and then what kind of support those asylum seeker gets here in Canada. I was asked to touch upon the role of UNHCR, so I will do so at the end of my presentation. Hopefully we'll have
Mrs.
time. Yeah.
Otis, I think you're in presenter mode, so we see like the notes and everything.
Oh, we see the notes. So I'm going to, so should I do that? We'll end this. Okay, and then I will put it front like this. Does it work like that or not? Not yet. It's funny because, you know, when you tested earlier, it was fine. So just a moment, please.
Maybe if you go in display settings.
Okay, let's go in display. Display design, display, I don't see it. I used to be able, okay.
I think if you go just at the bottom of your PowerPoint,
yeah,
there is like a little icon at the bottom, okay, with like
Oh, there it is.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Bon, is that better?
It's loading.
It's loading. Okay.
So I'll give it presentation mode.
Okay.
I think you
You'll
can
be,
go in display setting in this page. This page, there's display setting at the top.
yeah. Okay, I see it. Just a moment. Yeah. I have to tell you that okay, swap presenter, duplicate. Yeah, to slideshow. Bon, there we go. Better.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Good. It's Saturday morning, and I've been moving to another house a whole week, so bear with me. Okay, so we'll go with the definition, but I think that sometimes, you know, in the newspaper, we are talking about migrants and refugees and everything is a bit mixed up. Actually, it's not a problem that it's been mixed up. However, for us, it's very very important for UNHCR to make some kind of difference, because refugees are people who cannot return to their country of origin because of the fear of persecution, because of the fact that they fear also to be killed or to have their fundamental rights attained. So we have to be it's important to recognize this, because the refugees and asylum seekers, they have behind them quite a whole system of protection that's recognized within a convention that we touched upon earlier in Dr. Arias' presentation. The most important thing then for a person who arrives at the border and claims that she or he needs protection is the principle of non-refoulement, which means that a country cannot return that person right away until the claims of that person is being studied and being heard also. So going back to the convention relating to the status of refugees, it's back to 1951. It was a bit revamped in 67 because at that time there were a lot of movement of decolonization that made basically a lot of situation of crisis throughout the world. So now this convention is totally universal since 67. So what you see in the definition is basically, and what is very important, that the person cannot or do not want to avail himself of the protection because the country is unable to or doesn't want to. That's a very important aspect of the definition. Now, one thing that's important regarding Canada is that in 69, Canada signed that convention and introduced in the national law. So it's not only signing the convention, but ratifying it in putting the definition in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And the name is very important. It's been changed since 2000. I mean, actually, it went through all kinds of changes throughout the years, but the definition is still there, 96. And that's actually is essentially the definition of refugee, but you also have additional protection that's provided by the Canadian system is in section 97, and it's a person who does not have necessarily that who is persecuted or claims to be persecuted, but not necessarily for one of the motive, the grounds that we saw earlier: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group. Now, for those who maybe I should touch upon these various aspects of the definition. I guess race, religion, or ethnic groups, nationality, membership, political opinion is clear, but membership in a particular social group has throughout the years been developed and includes domestic violence, genital mutilations, LGBTQ claims, and so on and so forth. So going back to the law, 96 reproduces this definition and 97 enlarges it. So you have people in Canada who will come, claim under 96 or 97, but may be accepted only under 97 because they cannot make the link between one of the grounds that exist in the Refugee Convention and the persecution. So as you see, 97 is a person who would fear to be personally subjected to a danger or in terms of being tortured. So that's fear to be tortured, or a risk for their life, a risk of cruel and unusual treatment. So that's very important to retain, that Canada has enlarged that definition. Now, I'm not going to go through the global trends because Dr. Harriet did it, but I want to basically return to refugee. A refugee is a person who fears to be persecuted and claims to be persecuted because of one of the grounds. We saw that definition. An asylum seeker is essentially someone who arrives, so leaves the country, arrives at the border and asks for protection. Repatriated, I thought it was important to mention it because unfortunately, the first thing that people want is a return home, right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that, but it's very difficult now because the crises are not only multiplying, but are also lasting in time. Just give you the example of Syria, but before that, Afghanistan and others as well. Stateless, where nobody or no country is recognizing an individual, the individual is stateless. Internally displaced persons is essentially people who are refugees, but within their own country, like they had no opportunity to get out. And just to be aware that in terms of numbers, it's the double of refugees. So many people just cannot leave their country of origin, even if they face persecution or severe difficulties with their fundamental rights. So as I said earlier, many crises, you see, when you go to the UNHCR website, you see the list of the crisis. When I came into UNHCR in 2004, and when I left for this first mission in 2009 in Sri Lanka, at that time, there were maybe 3 major crises. And now look, we're in 2021 and it's multiplying, with the last one being Ethiopia. So now I'm going to focus on Canada and maybe much more on Quebec, since the office that I'm heading is in Montreal. And as you could see, the asylum claim in Canada has indeed increased since 2015. There's been throughout the years ups and downs, but particularly due to, and we mentioned it before, the arrival of a new administration in the United States in 2016, the claims in Canada have increased. Why? Because the Trump administration had announced and applied very strict policies in terms of the people who were in the territory, whether it was without status or as asylum seekers and coming from specific countries. I think you probably have heard about that. So and it was actually quite difficult even up to next year, because there would have been a very fundamental change in the asylum system in the United States, which would have created probably more arrival if it had not been of COVID. The Biden administration is changing all that, and we'll see in due time what it after the COVID is passed, what it means. So in terms of the numbers, let's be very frank, this is not a country where we can call there is a massive arrivals. This expression cannot be equal what's happening here in Canada. We have actually quite a drop of asylum seekers. When you see that in countries in Africa and Middle East, it's literally with millions of people, or for example, in Bangladesh, when they receive those people from Myanmar, 1.5 million. I mean, so you can see the difference. It's basically a drop. And then in 2020, due to COVID, the closure of the borders had a very, very important aspect. We can talk about it in questions later on. So let's see. You want to make a refugee claim here in Canada. Where do you go? How do you do it? First of all, you have to be aware that the people who are claiming, there's no such a thing as the best little refugee. It doesn't exist. There's no portrait, there's no picture of what is an asylum seeker, because everybody's different, all circumstances are different, and the countries of origin also differs. So you have to keep in mind that the itineraries of these people can be a person with a 10-year visa in the United States, it can be a person using fraudulent documents, can be a person who has gone through maybe 16 countries before arriving to Canada, or a direct flight from wherever, Mexico, for example. So you have to consider this, that everybody is different, and also the claims and the persecutions also are different, with different impacts on them. But I would say that in common, there definitely a lot of these people have traumas, definitely so. But you also have people who, even though they're claiming, would not necessarily qualify as refugees because of the considerations, legal considerations, or other aspects. But it doesn't make, sometimes people think they are, but they're not necessarily according to the definition. So let's go back to the reality of things. How can you get to Canada? That's another thing, but how, once you are in Canada, where can you ask for protection? Definitely the Canadian Border Services Agency is the agency that guards the borders in Canada, terrestrial borders, airports, and seaports, because yes, people can also claim asylums once they have arrived in a port, a seaport in Canada. It's not very frequent, but it does happen. Most of the times to the East Coast in Halifax, but maybe you may remember that years ago, there was a certain number of people, again, not many, 300 plus another 70 coming from Sri Lanka via Thailand, in this time in the West Coast in Vancouver. So you can claim I've put Quebec with all the ports. I mean, there's so many ports of entries in Quebec. So you can arrive through the border. We'll talk about it later on. The airports, of course, you can always, once you land, claim asylum there, and the seaports. That's under the responsibility of the CBSA. You can also, and that's actually the higher percentage right now of people asking for protection in Canada, it's in Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada offices. So you have a certain number of offices throughout the country. And in Montreal, you can do it. And I added here embassies. Well, for embassies, it's because the law, Immigration and Citizenship Canada Act, Immigration and Protection, Refugee Protection Act allows for it. However, it is very, very, very rare that a person in that situation will first have access to an embassy, a Canadian embassy, and second, to have the claim recognized. We see that sometimes here and there with very high profile cases, and that also happens. Now, everything that I'm telling you now, I'm going to be very general because the COVID-19 has changed quite a bit of things. But let's go back now to the land border, okay? It's very, very, I'm not going to go into the details of it because I don't think it's necessary, but perhaps it's also necessary for you to know that the big picture, that there is what we call a safe third country agreement between the United States and Canada, which was put into place in 2003 and was actually thought of much earlier than 2001 regarding this event in New York. It was discussions that were happening between Canada and United States, but it was more in the favor of Canada in order to reduce the number. Now, in principle, you have to understand that this safe third country agreements are in principle okay and recognized in international law and accepted, because it's a kind of a, I don't like the expression burden sharing, but sometimes you'll see it in the literature, burden sharing, or let's say a share of responsibilities towards the people who are asking for protection. So the situation with the country safe third country agreement, it has been challenged before the court years ago, didn't work, and now it's been challenged again, and by the NGOs, notably the Refugee Council of Canada or Canadian Refugee Council and other NGOs. And now, for your information, it's it's before the appeal court. So we'll see what happens with this, but for the moment, it still exists. What does that mean? Is that some people who are presenting themselves at a regular port of entry, because you have to know that this safe third country agreement does not apply in between regular port of entries, okay? Hence the famous Roxham Road, which is considered not to be an official port of entry, but who came quite reputed during those last years. And those people arriving outside the official port of entry are dealt with as if they were inside Canada. So they do not have to be verified in function of this safe third country agreement. So you have a certain number of people who are not included in that safe third. It doesn't apply to US citizens. It doesn't apply to stateless people, for example, who have lived in the United States for a year, for example. So, however, you also have other exceptions. For example, if a person has a valid Canadian visa, could get in. If you're under 18, so we call them unaccompanied minors who do not have their parents in the States, they can also come in. And there's a certain number of them who actually come throughout the years. I think that PRAIDA, which is the program, I'll talk about PRAIDA later on, but let's say social health and social services organization, not organization, but program that deals with the integration of asylum seekers. They also have unaccompanied minors as their under their responsibility. You also have people who tell you that they will face death penalty if they go back to the United States. And the most important one, and the one to remember, is family. So basically, at the time that we speak, the only people who can come in Canada through regular official port of entries throughout Canada, I'm not saying just for Quebec, are people who have close family members inside Canada. So let's continue. I have difficulties. Yeah. So right now, I think it's important for you to know that even though Roxham Road was very popular during the 3 last years, that means people who could not qualify for this STCA and decided nevertheless to enter Canada through an unofficial port of entry, such as Roxham Road. Right now, the border is closed, right, for these people, in the sense that people who are entering now through Roxham Road, since the 21st of March 2020, they cannot enter. They enter, and the CBSA will take their fingerprints, will take everything that's needed, and then will tell them to go back to the United States, following an agreement between Canada and the United States, and it's called a diplomatic note, in which there were some guarantees. And so those asylum seekers will eventually come back to Canada and be treated, that their claim will be treated. There are about 300 or something, 381 per person in that situation. However, at the regular port of entries, people still come in and they have to spend 14 days of quarantine, and especially when you talk about Saint-Bernard-de-la-Colle, it's in a hotel nearby. And eventually, so they are sent in Montreal, and they go to YMCA or to family members if necessary. So COVID-19 had, I think Dr. Aria touched upon it, a very important impact on the people. That's why the numbers are quite low, and that's why the numbers of people coming through Roxham Road are also definitely quite low. Now, one thing that you should know is that wherever you come in Canada, you have a first interview. It is not the hearing on your claim, but it's just that Canada has the right as a country to know who's coming in and in the territory, also for security reason, because you remember CBSA is there to also control the security. I forgot to tell you that at Roxham Road, it was the RCMP, so the GRC, because they also have this shared responsibility to protect the country. So it's not only that, it's because they want to see if the person who's asking protection is eligible for various reasons. Let's say you had, and we've seen cases of people, for example, from Eritrea, who had been resettled as a refugee to Sweden, for example, and who became citizens eventually. We've seen cases of people who came and claimed refugee status, even though they came in and presented other pretenses, but eventually it was found out that they were actually citizens of Sweden. So obviously the person had some kind of protection in Sweden and could not apply for protection here in Canada. But that's a very rare case, and I think it rarely happens in terms of the reason not to be accepted as an applicant. You also are the most, let's say, recurrent situation is when you are not admissible on security grounds because of criminality, human rights violations, for example. So you have different, I'm not going to repeat all the admissibility, but those are the reasons why you would not be admissible, in a sense that you would not be having access to the court. Now remember this, however, because it's not always, it's a complicated system. That's why I don't want to lose you. But you have also people who may not have access to the court, but may also have another kind of, let's say, protection or recourse, which is called the pre-removal risk assessment. So if you're found eligible at this first interview made by CBSA or IRCC, the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, inside Canada, when you go to claim in an inside office. I'll give you an example. You know, you have another typical example that I've seen at that time when I was practicing lawyer is a person who is coming, has been studying for 3 years in a university, has a student visa and sometimes a work visa, and found out that in his country there's a crisis that has been in place since a few months, and definitely cannot get all the funds to continue his studies, and also furthermore has reasons to be persecuted, to fear to be persecuted if he returns to the country of origin. So he might also apply from within Canada. Now, so if you are found eligible, let me just clear this.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Remaining.
You tell me when I have to go back.
No, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's continue. I know that because I know that the next that Abdullah will explain to you the basis of claim and also everything that I saw in the program that he will bring you there. Now, the basket of services for asylum applicants, you have what Dr. Arief referred to as the interim federal health plan. So this is basically some aspect of health problems are covered by this program for asylum seekers. You can also have access to work permit, although nowadays there's due to COVID and because the people cannot be met in person, there's a situation there. You can have access to study permit, but you need then to pay. And you have now, which has been, it's quite recent, subsidized daycare, but that's very recent, welfare and also legal aid. And however, you have no access to family allowances. So I made a difference between asylum seekers and also applicants because the system is different depending on the situation. Now, I mentioned earlier PRIDA, and I also want to mention REVO because I have, especially when I was practicing, referred to them quite a bit because they offer psychological reports, but also treatment to people with, particular mental health issues. So I will leave it that. I know it gives us maybe just 3 minutes or 2 minutes. I don't know for the questions, but I'll be very happy to answer. In Canada, UNHCR, we have various sectors. We work on protection, and that's basically about reviewing regulations or laws and making recommendations. We also have a sector on durable solutions, where our colleagues will deal with the government in order to have more spaces for resettlement, which is having a refugee coming in as a permanent resident. We also want to enlarge those solutions. For example, finding places. I know that McGill offers places for refugees in a particular program through the WUSC. We also want to try to find systems of economical ways to get those refugees who have specific competences to be able to come and work for a specific employer. We also work on communications, because keeping keeping our communities open is very important. And external affairs, because we have to accompany the government of Canada in various, not only to get the money, because we need money for the external programs, but also for all kinds of support that Canada might be able to give to other countries through the asylum systems, notably in Central America. And then fundraising, of course, because without money, you cannot do much. So that is it for me. And the PowerPoint will be at your disposal. Thank you for your understanding and for inviting me. Very appreciate.
Thank you so much, Ms. Otis. It was a really amazing talk. So for anyone who has question, you can ask it right now in the chat. We'll have a 5-minute break right now, so you can feel free to take your break or to stay on to ask your questions. I think there is one question in the chat. Can you see it?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Yeah, indeed. So currently, Juan Carlos, this is exactly what's happening now. This was happening until recently, where we were still wondering if, with the last imposition of how do you call the OIC, that it means this order of the government, with the last one, if indeed the asylum seeker could still come in. But I was told that yes, that the asylum seekers would be still coming, because in any case they are having this quarantine. And now one thing that I'm not too sure about, because this is quite recent and sometimes we don't get the answers right away. But I was told that they could still cross the regular port of entries and have this quarantine. I'm pretty sure at this moment, but this is something I need to verify if there's be some kind of testing, I would imagine. But that's the reality, or at least it was until a week ago. But I checked my emails Friday or Thursday, and the answer was not still clear, but I heard that this was still the situation. Yeah. And I have to tell you that the YMCA, where they are temporarily sheltered, had no case whatsoever since March 2020 of any COVID cases.
There's a question that was asked privately. Do you give consent to share your slides?
Yes, I do. Yes, definitely. Yes. Do I know if asylum seekers are directed to Praia once they arrive here? Well, because of, you see, it depends. Because if they have family members that can accept them, they will go to family members. Otherwise, if it's difficult, because they all have family members, right? Because they were able to come in with that condition. Usually it's the exception. But sometimes it's not appropriate to go to family members for whatever reason. So they will go to Praia for a while. And usually it's about 1 month. But I've heard recently from Praia that depending on the situation, due to COVID, they may keep the person a little longer. But then the people will have their welfare, and they have a certain number of ground organizations that help them to find an apartment. But again, as Dr. Harry has said, since it's usually a remote work, that's why Praia keeps them until they're settled. The problem, the issue right now is access to work permit, but the government is working on it as well. What is a concern for UNHCR, this is not part of the questions, but I want just to tell you, is the people who are detained. Because there are a certain number, it's quite low. Usually it was about 60 to 90 people detained, not all asylum seekers. I'm talking under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, but right now it's lower to 10 to 12. And now there's the situation that we have to look at it carefully. Yeah, indeed, they're optional. You're right. PRIDA services are indeed optional. And sometimes it's too bad because sometimes in the sense that some people may need an accompaniment in terms of health and social services, and they may not know all the time, that PRIDA exists. Although at the border, we made sure that pamphlets are given to everybody so they can have access to their care if necessary. But you're right, there are other sources in the community. Definitely Juan Carlos. Oh, Dr. Juan Carlos. Dr. Shegwi, sorry, whatever. So any other questions? I'm always available. I know that in my last slide, there was, you can take a look at it. I put my email, so I'm available to you. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much once again, and thank you for taking part in the symposium.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
great day.
you
And
too.
that's a fantastic initiative, and keep doing it. Ciao.
Thank you so much. Can you please unshare your screen so I can share mine?
Yes, I'm trying to have, it's kind of frozen here.
Okay.
Just a moment. Oops. There we go.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'll be sharing my screen again. So basically, we technically had a break and we're back at 10:15. So now we'll be moving to our next talk. So the next talk is gonna walk us through the legal process to claim asylum seeker and really consolidate this concept, as well as how the legal process affect the integration of asylum seeker. And after this talk, eventually we'll have a little break of 5 minutes, and we'll be transitioning to the next talk. So I am very happy and honored to announce our next speaker, who is Abdullah Dawood. He has an academic background in mathematics, statistics, and political science. As the co-founder of the Refugee Center, he leads the center in its various roles to help strengthen the refugee and immigrant population in Canada. He also oversees the staff and the center's program, including the legal clinic, language classes, academic and orientation, as well as employability services and the wellness support program. He comes from a refugee and migrant upbringing himself and has several years of experience in social and political advocacy. And last but not least, he is very passionate about finding innovative solutions to social problems. Thank you once again, Abdullah, to join us today in this symposium, and you can take us away with your talk.
Thanks for having me. It's a very cool event, and thanks for the very kind introduction. So yeah, I'm just going to share my screen right now, and then we'll get started. All right. So, everyone's seeing my screen okay? Thumbs up. Great. Okay. So, first and foremost, we're the Refugee Center. We've existed now for about since 2015. Sorry, my screen's a bit slow. So yeah, a little bit about us. We, when we first started, we kind of approached the asylum-seeking refugee claimant and refugee kind of integration scene a bit differently than others. We did a quick environmental scan. I wouldn't say quick, it was about 5 months. We did an environmental scan of Montreal and Quebec as a whole to see what services are available for asylum seekers and refugees to aid with integration. When we started, we found that while there are good services, there's still a lot of gaps. And from our surveying and from our interviews, we found that those gaps kind of were positioned in areas where Quebec was just not willing to cater to. So for example, when we started our academic and language classes sector, we found that a high amount of newly admitted refugees, refugee claimants who are now protected persons, or privately sponsored refugees were willing to go back into university, seek higher education, but we're missing one component, which was English proficiency examinations. So IELTS or TOEFL or IELTS exams, if you're all familiar with it. The only available class in Quebec was were private classes. And I think the cheapest we found at the time was around $800 to $900 per session, which was kind of outside of the range. Within our first semester, our first class was about 8 people. Our third class, we had 150 people registered. So there was a huge gap that was there that we were able to focus on. And that's how we approach almost all of our sectors. So right now, in 2015, we started off with 3 sectors: legal aid, academic and language classes, and orientation. Now we're up to 5. So we have legal aid, academic language classes, orientation, employment services, and wellness support. Wellness support being the latest addition. And wellness support is just a creative way of saying mental health services. But we'll get into why we call it that a bit later. But yeah, to go through each sector, our legal aid clinic offers all the legal services that can be afforded to asylum seekers and refugees. So for asylum seekers, we offer help to claim asylum. We have actual legal representation. We have a legal team, depending on the amount of interns, but we have a legal team that's on average about 8 people. We help with work permits. We help with study permits. We help with the free removal risk assessment cases as well. We do appeals, and we do humanitarian and compassionate cases, which I'll explain later on in the presentation. Our academic and language classes, basically a little bit like what I said before, we offer language classes, but we also offer paths for reintegration into previous academic fields or professional fields. So we have a lot of asylum seekers or refugees who were doctors, lawyers, optometrists, dentists, who often put away that profession to seek temporary work, and they get stuck in that temporary job. So we work with all the professional orders to kind of create a pathway where they can continue practicing and continue those fields, because it is a bit demoralizing to be a doctor for 30 or 40 years and come here and go to a completely different job. Orientation, exactly what it sounds like. We have orientation sessions. We used to do them through workshops, but now we actually do one-on-ones. So you can just go on our website and they book, and they have a meeting one-on-one with our staff. And we introduce them to Montreal, introduce them to everything. And we've even streamlined it to an online process that I'll showcase a bit later. Employment services is very straightforward. We have a big rule of thumb that we don't work to do temporary jobs. So we don't help, well, we can if it's really demanded or if it's urgent, but what we try to do is that we've worked with private industry to create kind of career-led jobs. So any job that would lead to career. So, you know, we're not going to, for example, push a person to a factory job that we know it's a dead-end job. We'll be pushing them to jobs that are in banking or in finance or administrative work that has some sort of corporate ladder in order for them to maintain financial stability. And last is kind of like our mental health sector, which we started in October, that focuses on mental well-being, and I'll get into that a bit later. But one of the main reasons we came here today was to talk about the legal process. Now, I know Denise, who's amazing from UHCR, has already went through a little bit of this, and I won't spend too much time on it, but I want to make sure that the process is clear for everybody in case new people join also a bit later. And also I'm sure Denise went through this, but I'm going to go through quite quick the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee. Asylum seekers are individuals who are who have come to Canada through different methods, who have yet to basically, for lack of better terms, prove that they need protection in Canada. So they apply, and through that, there is a legal and bureaucratic process that they have to go through. Whereas when a refugee has already been recognized, usually through a governing body, an international governing body, UNHCR being the largest, and they would be coming to Canada through the public sponsorship program and private sponsorship program. So I'm going to focus today on asylum seeking because that's the main kind of thrust of the symposium. So for asylum seeking, it can happen 3 different ways when they come to Canada. So from within Canada, so those applies to individuals who have visas have already come here, whether it's a study visa or a visitor's visa, any type of classification for them to be here and travel within Canada. And then they would just start a claim through any RCC office, RCC being Immigration and Refugee Institute of Canada. At a border, land, or air or seaport, this is an important distinction that we're going to be focusing on due to what Denise alluded to earlier about the Safe Third Country Agreement. So if you're to by border, so whether to be by car or airplane or a seaport, there are certain classifications due to that agreement that would apply to you that would either negate you from applying or allow you to apply. Denise has already went through them, so I won't repeat them, but those have created a little bit of a, you would say, a political stir within Canada and also within a lot of human rights organizations as to if, given the Trump administration, its time there, if it really should be applicable or not. And then last one is irregular entry, and it's very important that I stress this, that for all professionals in different fields, that we continue to use the word irregular rather than illegal. Illegal gives this connotation that a law is being broken, or this belief that a law is being broken, whereas no law is being broken when an asylum seeker is entering Canada through not an official border crossing or through an airport or seaport, because their intention is to claim asylum. So with them doing that act, they're not doing an illegal act. So they wouldn't be under, Canada doesn't see it as an illegal act neither. And also this is verified through the Canadian Bar Association, the Quebec Bar Association, that them going irregularly is not an illegal act. And it's a very important thing, I stress upon it, because if we were to use the word illegal, it seems that we've already kind of subjected them or put them in a corner in which we're vilifying them, when in this case, they're asylum seekers are often, majority of the time, products of circumstance. So it's not that they want to cross illegally, it's that the circumstances are created through the Safe Third Country Agreement and through the laws that are in place, force them to do so. And Quebec is currently one of the largest recipients of asylum seekers in Canada. Thus, our involvement kind of nationally on this issue is very important. So if you were to claim in any of those different ways, you'd be received by different individuals or different, if you cross irregularly, you are arrested, but it's very temporary. It's just to inform you of your rights and then give you an opportunity for you to claim asylum. Once you've claimed asylum, then you can start your claim and you're not arrested. And then after that, that claim is what we'll talk about today. So again, I know Denise talked about it, so I won't stress too much about it. But basically, once you're about to claim, you have 15 days. In those 15 days, you have to fill out a form called the Basis of Claim Form, along with something called Schedule 12 and Schedule 12A. So overall, depending how big your family is, those forms are painstaking and very important, because that's what's going to make or break your case, because you're held to those words that you fill out. The basis of claim in general, if I was to sum it up, would just be your story, the reason why you're claiming asylum in Canada, or or what you're facing that you had to escape. So it's very, very important that you fill out that correctly. And a lot of individuals, unfortunately, do not seek legal counsel because they don't know that they have the right to be an affordable lawyer or qualify for legal aid in Quebec. So just to go over it quickly, depending on your status, if the safe third country agreement applies to you, if you're, for example, from a country, some countries you're not technically allowed to apply from, so because we've already deemed them as safe. So if you're a person from Finland, for example, and you were to claim in Canada, you would have to have a really, really convincing reason for them to allow you to claim. If not, you would be rejected on the spot. And then yeah, so once you apply, you have 15 days to apply. Once you apply, you're given a confirmation letter. And from there, this is where it becomes really problematic, is it typically, before 2016, 2015, the claiming period for you to wait for a hearing date with the IRB, which is the Immigration Refugee Board, would be a month or two. Now it has been, we've heard cases, there's no average really, but we've heard cases that go up to almost 2 years or 3 years. So that becomes problematic because your status in Canada is kind of in limbo and you're given very little rights, as Denise has stated before. So you're in Canada on a 2 to 3 year period where you have to keep renewing your work permit. You have to, if you want to study, you have to pay international student fees. You have to apply for a study permit. Attaining a job is difficult due to the type of work permit that's given to you. So you're here on an open work permit, and an open work permit is not really delegated to any specific sector. So employers will look at that as kind of a risk because they don't know if this open work permit is subject to renewal or not. So if they were to hire you, they don't know when, if they can or cannot rehire you afterwards. So typically, the banking sector does not accept open work permits. If you look at most professional fields, they'll see that as too risky, so they just won't do it. So you're limited in the type of jobs that you can get. So you can see how problematic that can be once you've stayed here for more than a year, because you can't really progress career-wise or attain financial stability. If your claim is rejected, actually, before we get to that, this is another thing that we really have to learn about the Immigration Refugee Board is it's not made up of what we call conventional judges. So it's usually made up of 70% of them are ex-legal professionals. So whether they were paralegals or lawyers or people who practice in the immigration field, and 30% is what we call civil society. So for example, individuals like myself can go apply because we've worked in the field previously, but we weren't lawyers, for example, or paralegals. That is also could be problematic because often, more than not, especially now with the vast amount of cases and how Canada's trying to fill up more judges, we're seeing more and more kind of judges who aren't qualified to take on the cases or understand curious international affairs to kind of make judgment or understand the political landscape of a particular country and why that person is escaping danger. So this is where it gets messy. So unfortunately, if your claim is rejected, you have 15 days to appeal. However, they have to give you the right to appeal. So a third party kind of judge or federal court will look at your case and will see, okay, this case wasn't trialed correctly, or there was some biases here, so we'll allow you to appeal. And the biases can only occur in the procedural aspect. So for example, they cannot pass judgment on the actual judge. They can't say the judge was, for example, prejudiced against a particular group of people. They can't say that or use that as a reasoning. They would have to say procedurally the judge did not, for example, allow you a chance to confirm what you wrote on the basis of the claim. So there have to be some sort of procedural, administrative, or bureaucratic mistake done to allow you to appeal. And then from there, you can appeal. And again, you're given a very short period of time, so 15 days. And then after that, you're given another 15 days. And then you're given a removal order if it's rejected. If not, you can redo the entire process again. So back to the previous stage. Now, if you were to be rejected, you were given a removal order. In most cases, Canada does not really enforce removal orders, particularly because the majority of people who are applying from countries where it wouldn't be safe to send them back. So for example, countries like Yemen or Libya, if you were to reject their claim, Yemen does not have an international airport at the current time. So there will be no actual realistic or physical way for you to remove them from Canada. Also, it's deemed dangerous in a country that's currently in war, and legally we're not allowed to send or remove anyone back to a country that is in a state of actual war, because it would be deemed too dangerous. So it is kind of a weird, policy, given that you're rejecting the belief that they're in danger, yet you will not send them back to the country because you're deeming it too dangerous. So that is something that's also being challenged in the courts. Now, I think this is the most important part that we have to talk about today. That this timeline, like I said, while the bureaucratic process for you to submit papers is very short, you're given 15 days, the time in which you were to receive an answer is quite high. We have a case right now pending, for example, from Libya, that's going on 3 years and 2 months. So that in that time period, this individual has not been able to maneuver much in Canada, given that they're only on a work permit. They cannot go back to school because if they have to get a study permit to get back to school and then also pay international fees, whether it be a CEGEP, whether it be a university, or even high school. And those fees, the lowest we've seen was $8,000 per semester. And that takes a toll on their mental health 100%, especially if you're a single mother, if you have children. While the children can go back to school and attain education, because in Canada we allow them to do so without cost if you're below 18. However, it's still precarious because you don't know what the status is. You don't know what happens once they turn 18. And only until recently, a couple of weeks ago, have we allowed them to gain a stipend to put children in daycare. Before they couldn't do so. So single mothers have to go to work, would often spend the majority of their paycheck actually putting children in daycare. The mental toll is, I don't think you can measure it. I think it's vast, especially with COVID-19. When we opened up our mental health sector, again, we did the same thing with environmental scan. Well, there are very, very good, like for example, Denise mentioned the road, good mental health services. They are extremely overwhelmed. They have waiting lists that go up to 6 to 8 months just for an appointment. The staff themselves who are in these organizations are also extremely overwhelmed. And it's becoming a problem because it does eventually impact their integration once they become accepted, because now they're no longer, they're starting, I would say, at an extreme disadvantage. Rather than if the case was to be heard quickly, they will be able to get a job faster, their status will be more regulated, they'll be able to pick up where they left off. Now we're putting them in a position of disadvantage for a year or 2 years, and they're starting 5 steps back rather than 1 step forward or 2 steps forward. And that overall doesn't help Canadian society. And I think one of the main reasons, or one of the main, I guess, points in Canada or in general in Western society that we don't often look at is that it takes 2 to tango. It takes 2 parties for successful integration. It takes the incoming population to want to integrate and participate in society and do all the things that everyone does, and they're very eager to do so, because who doesn't want a job, and who doesn't want financial stability, and who doesn't want a better life? And also the welcoming population to create the environment for them to do so. The welcoming population has to also make sure that we're not creating obstacles that will inevitably put them at a disadvantage and put them in a precarious situation mentally for them not to progress forward. And often we forget about the second one. And I think the second one is one of the things that we have to work on a bit more. Canada has a very complex migration system, and it's very well structured, very bureaucratic. However, there's a lot of nuances. It's very rigid. We don't allow gray areas, and unfortunately, it's lagged behind because it was never structured to be able to intake the new amount of asylum seekers we now have to take, and it's caused a lot of problems, not just for the individuals but for civil society in general. Yeah, I think I know I went a little bit fast, but I wanted to also open kind of the floor a bit more for discussion to kind of see, especially on the specific issue of the effect on integration and mental health as well. So I'll open the floor for questions.
Thank you so much for this amazing talk. I think we have a question on the chat. Can you see it?
I think I just popped it up. Yeah, okay. So during these legal steps, after things are rejected and appeal is made, the immigration will be involved in the course. No, it's a good question. So believe it or not, they don't, there's no need legally for them to have any legal representation. So anybody can represent asylum seekers in the IRB because it's seen, it's not really seen, it's not what we perceive kind of through the media of what a court is. It's typically just a room with a judge and an interpreter. And like I said, that judge can be anybody. So even after an appeal is made, yes, you can have legal representation, but it's not required. And I think going back to what I said earlier, it's very important that they do have legal representation. Often more than not, they're unaware of their rights. They're unaware of how to correctly fill out these forms. These forms are very bureaucratic and made to kind of create little obstacles for you to contradict yourself, because the judge's main purpose in those hearings is to show that you have some sort of consistency to make you believable. Because a lot of the story always hinges on you escaping political danger or you escaping some sort of danger in the country. Those are things that are tough to prove unless they're very well documented, right? No one's house got destroyed, and before they got destroyed, like, I'm gonna take a picture. You know, it's typically, you have to take the person's word for it. So what the judge does the majority of the time is try to ensure that you're consistent and tries to see if you're honest. So they will go through these forms and be like, okay, so when did you go to school? What was the year you graduated? And they'll try to see if something in your timeline doesn't make sense. And then they'll leverage that to kind of say, okay, there's some dishonesty here. And when you're only given 15 days, especially with language barriers, and you don't have the correct interpreter, that can be problematic. So it's very important that you do have legal representation in order to do that. So we have 2 more questions. Okay. So here, when someone is making a claim to be a refugee and is waiting, are they considered to be asylum seeker at the time? Yes. So you're asylum seeker at that time because you have yet to prove that you're protected, like you're a refugee. So you will not be given a protected person status yet. So that's what I'm saying. You're only limited to your rights, and what Denise alluded to earlier as well. So you can only apply for a work permit. You can only apply for a study permit. On that study permit, you have to show proof of funds that you can afford to study here as an international student. And you're not, even the French classes that they offer here in Quebec, you're not allowed to take them. You're not allowed to take any government services, basically, that are afforded to migrants in general. Is there a limited duration? No, unfortunately, there's no limit. Not that we've heard of. Even when we've challenged certain limits, like certain times where it's gone too long, they just send you a letter in the mail back and says you have to wait. So, you know, we've done certain cases we've done where we submitted actual evaluations of a person's mental state and what they were going through or problems, and those haven't provided anything positive. So unfortunately, there's very little as as kind of a community organizations or grassroots has to do legally. You would have to challenge this on a policy level and kind of on a governmental level that would probably go up to the federal court. When saying that the refugee system is not well suited to respond to today's demand, the solution resides in different policy makings and system reforms. So it both the Safe Third Country Agreement is one of the reasons why this is an issue. The Safe Third Country Agreement is pushing individuals to kind of put their lives at risk and cross irregularly. Crossing irregularly, by the way, is not a fun process, especially in the wintertime. I'm sure you've all heard of different cases. There was one when this first started happening back in 2017 and 2016 of an individual crossing irregularly and didn't know that they were in Manitoba and kept walking and walking and walking until they suffered frostbite, that they had to amputate 2 of their fingers. There are individuals who are, putting, in order to escape danger, they have to endure the danger of going through winter in a dark place in the woods and the forest to cross irregularly. It's not sustainable. So a Safe Third Country Agreement is what's forcing to do that. So having them just apply to border crossing would be probably the best solution. It would be more organized. We'd be able to create a better system to process these individuals, and then we'd actually have better metrics or better statistical upkeep of everything. Can you distinguish the type of representation to expect from a lawyer versus immigration consultant? Sure. So a lawyer, listen, so there's wills everywhere, even especially in the legal field. I wouldn't say one is more versed than the other to help represent you. It's a lawyer's job is to ensure that you go through the bureaucratic process correctly and that your rights are maintained. A lawyer can't, again, it's not a typical court. There's no objecting, there's no going in and making the case for you. The lawyer actually doesn't say anything in that room. And the majority of the time, the lawyer is making sure that the judge follows the rules and that you also have the right to express yourself and as you legally have the right to express yourself. So the lawyer just ensures that the bureaucratic process is done correctly and that you're representing yourself correctly and that you're not basically falling for any traps and that you understand what you're doing. And it is, I'm downplaying it, but it is very, very important. And why I say a legal or immigration consultant should help you do this is because they've been there, they're more seasoned, they know bureaucracy very well, and they can train you and prep you beforehand. It is really up to the asylum seeker to kind of do the test, to testify and convince the judge. But I wouldn't necessarily put one above the other. What are the major barriers for asylum seeker refugees with professional backgrounds that wish to practice in Quebec? Why does it seem to be so common to have refugees who have worked as doctors, lawyers, not be able to do so here? Is it more provincial, federal level? So yeah, it really depends on which professional we're talking about. So if we're talking about doctors, for example, this is the Medical Association of Canada handles this. That process is unfortunately more dynamic than it is static. It changes from every couple of years. And aside from that, it's not so much so that they can't do it. They can do it. However, they make it very costly to do so, and they ensure that it's a very long process. So in order for you to become a doctor, you have to, get past a certain exam, QC1, Q2, I forgot the actual number off the top of my head, but there's an exam that you have to pass. To write that exam, it's $1,200. To buy the booklets and the preparatory stuff for that exam is $350. You can only write it specific times of the year. If you miss the opportunity, you have to wait another full year. Then you have to write the second one, which is another $1,200. And then from there, you have to redo your residency. So the process itself is quite long. It's quite problematic. It doesn't give credence too much to their experience or their professional degree that they've attained in other countries. So yeah, I would pretty much say that it's up to the orders. Usually, they're the ones who do the policies for this. So the Medical Association of Canada is the one who decides this. They do it in parallel with the federal government. However, they have the most of the say, and they have kind of the leverage when it comes to policy making. It's the same thing with the dental association, same thing with I would say actually the legal profession is probably the easiest one. They make it very easy for individuals to become lawyers here. And that's usually through the different bar associations in different provinces. But yeah, I would say bureaucracy and I would say policy making within those orders themselves. And those orders have a vested interest to keep the number low. They don't want to overpopulate those professions. So yeah, there would need to be kind of an interference with either with community organizations or on a federal level. Great. Great. Do you have any statistics regarding the percent of asylum seekers that get their request? Yeah, so it's actually available on Stats Canada. You can look at asylum seeking statistics with Stats Canada. There's a page on it. It will tell you the number every year. I think right now, last time I checked, I'm sorry if the number's off, but I checked a few months ago. I think we're at 40 to 50% acceptance rate, which is quite good. If you look at European countries, they're usually around the 5% range, 10% range. But again, people keep forgetting that Canada's surrounded by oceans, and we're kind of, we don't share borders, and our numbers are actually quite low. It is a drop in the bucket compared to countries like Turkey or Jordan or Lebanon, who have millions and millions of asylum seekers coming in. So us, when we have 60,000 per year or 70,000 per year, it's really not that large of a number, and Canada structurally can't handle it. It's just we don't invest too much into it. I heard the refusal rate for South Asian asylum seekers, the CFR is about 60% now. Yeah, so yeah, it depends on the particular subset or country as well. Like I said, different countries have different classifications. Claiming from a country that Canada already deems safe can be, we're typically not allowed. So yeah, so it really does differ from country to country. But again, those stats are available. Another thing I want to share, if we have time, there we go. So as a tool, I know we have other organizations here as well that are in the symposium, and I would invite them to also use this. So, and if you're all ever do deal with asylum seekers, we've created an online tool where they can actually find all the services that they want. It's in its beta version, but I think in that week we're going to have the full version with 4 different languages, so English, French, Arabic, and Spanish. You would enter here. You can register, you don't have to, and then you can actually chat with the automated chatbot to find a service or explore the maps around you based on categories. So I'll just show you a 10-second demo, but
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think we can't see what you're seeing right now.
Oh, you're not? Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay, so new share, there we go. I think it was stuck on one page. Okay, so here it is. Can you see now? Perfect. Thank you so much for interrupting me. So there's, so there's this. You would go in. It's going to be in 4 different languages. Right now, it's in 2. But yeah, you can either you can keep track of what you need, or you can just explore a chat. So for example, you can chat here, you can choose the language that you're choosing. Based on your specific legal status, you can find which organizations can serve you on all these major cities and based on what you need. So for example, if we're in Montreal and we're a refugee claimant, we can say mail, and I would say I want legal services. This is the type of legal services that are available. Let's say I want a work permit help. After that, it'll process. It's a bit slow, like I said, in the beta phase, but it'll tell you all the organizations in Montreal that will help you with your legal services. You can do this through a map format as well. You can bookmark the services, all that, play around with it. It's just called allocanada.org. But we're launching the full version in 2 weeks. We did this with the Canadian Red Cross. And then, yeah, it's all the major cities in Canada. And it's, I think we have about almost 1,000 organizations on there. We're still populating them. It's always going to be a process, but it's a very useful tool for anybody who's going to be dealing with asylum seekers and needs to situate them for mental health services or anything else that they don't know about. There's another chat. So there's two questions here in the chat. Could you comment on the safe third-party agreement the Trudeau government wants to keep in place? In fact, yeah. So we were actually part of the organizations that are against it legally. It is a list of a lot of different organizations who are doing so. The Safe Third Country Agreement, I think, was put in place about over a decade now, and it was put at a different time, doesn't really apply anymore, and has really caused the problems that we're facing right now, because you don't need, we shouldn't be creating or allowing individuals to cross irregularly because it puts them in danger. If we can just have an organized fashion for them to come through, that's fine. Removing the Safe Third Country Agreement will not increase the numbers or decrease the numbers. It will be the same numbers. Almost every statistician or policymaker has said so. All academic studies have said so. It really doesn't make sense to do this. There are political reasons to do it, so much so that I don't think we can get into today. But there is political reasons for why the Trudeau government would want to keep this. However, if you look at why the NDP and the NDP has went against it, same thing with the Green Party, and you can look at why the reasons why they've listed is quite extensive. Yeah, I can give you the link on the chat right now. It's available now, but the full version will be updated next week to include all the other languages. So any other questions? I think I went over time, so I'm sorry about that.
Thank you so much again for your talk and this amazing resource. Since we are like 10:56, I think we've passed through the break, so we'll get through the next part. So I'll share my screen in a few seconds. Okay, so let's move on. So the next two talks that we will have will basically be the challenges faced by healthcare workers serving migrants. And we'll also have a very short session at the end, so you can stay tuned until the end if you want to still be eligible for the certification, as well as be part of the raffle draw. So without further ado, I will introduce our speakers. So our next speakers is Caroline Clavel. Caroline Clavel is a project manager for the Centre d'expertise sur le bien-être et l'état de santé physique des réfugiés et des demandeurs d'asile, which is abbreviated as CERDA, of the CIUS du Centre-Ouest de l'île de Montréal. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology and is currently a PhD candidate in community psychology at the University of Quebec in Montreal. She has been working for CERDA since 2017, as well as she's also in charge of various knowledge transfer activity, as well as projects such as the development of a tool for a refugee and asylum seeker to facilitate their resettlement in Quebec. She will be giving a talk with Jan Zoldan, who's also a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. He works at the Clinique Mauve, where he provides mental health services for Montreal's LGBTQ2S+ migrant community. He also worked at RIVO, which stands for Réseau d'intervention auprès des personnes ayant subi la violence organisée, providing psychotherapy to refugees who are victims of political violence. He's also a postdoctoral fellow at the Division of Social and Transcultural Psychiatry at McGill University under the supervision of Professor Cécile Rousseau. And last but not least, his research interests focus on improving clinical practice for marginalized and culturally diverse population. So again, I'm very happy and honored to be announcing these two speakers. And I think you can take us in, Caroline and Jan.
Thank you, Sakina. Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen because we have a PowerPoint. Can you see it? Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. So we're going to try to not take too much time. So first of all, thank you very much for Sukaina and everybody for this conference. My English is a bit rusty, so thank you for your patience and everything. So today we're going to talk about the challenges and resources for healthcare professionals working with refugees and asylum seekers. So I'm Caroline Clavel, and I'm a project manager for CERDA, and I'm going to present with Jan. You want to present yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jan Zolden.
So today, a very quick overview of our presentation. We're going to talk about the context of arrival and access to healthcare for refugees and asylum seekers. I'm going to talk about CERDA, and then we're going to talk about challenges faced by healthcare professionals and how to have a practice sensitive to the realities of refugees and asylum seekers, and how to take care of yourself. And last but not least, we will present some resources for you. So context of arrival and access to healthcare for refugees and asylum seekers. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I know the presenters before me have talked to you about it. So there are mainly two ways of obtaining refugee status, and it's important to know about this because it's going to influence how you're going to have access to healthcare. So you can have obtain refugee status from abroad as a resettled refugee, so you can come as a government-assisted refugee or as a privately sponsored refugee. Or you can have the status from Canada as an asylum seeker. So access to healthcare services depends on, on your status. So if you are a resettled refugees, when you arrive in Canada, you have the permanent status, and you can have access to an assessment of your well-being and of your physical health. This assessment is carried out by 14 teams all across Quebec. They have been specifically mandated by the Ministry of Health to carry out this evaluation. And if you are a resettled refugee, you have access to RAMQ with your permanent status, and you have access also to IFHP, which is PFSI in French. And I'm going to talk to you about what is IFHP, so it's medical coverage. If you are an asylum seeker, you have access to IFHP. You don't have access to RAMQ, and you have access to PRIDA services that can, help you and to have some well-being evaluation. But it's not like the 14 teams. The 14 teams with resettled refugees are mandated then to refer to you to other services. So once they've done their assessment, they can refer you to other services. So what is IFHP, which is Interim Federal Health Programs? So IFHP is a health insurance that covers medical care, medication, and additional services. Additional services, it's very large, so you can have, you can see maybe sometimes a dentist, so you can have some dentist services covered, or you can see a psychologist. Some sessions can be covered by the IFHP. And who are the beneficiaries? So asylum seekers have IFHP up to 90 days after obtaining refugee status or until the date of deportation. Refugees have access to IFHP for medication and additional services for 1 year. They don't have access to medical care because they have RAMQ. So these are the people who are the beneficiaries. CERDA. So CERDA is a Center for Expertise on the Well-being and Physical Health of Refugees and Asylum Seekers. So we've been created in 2015 by the Ministry of Health, and we received a few mandates. So first of all, our mandate is to support the 14 teams I was telling you about before, to support them in their mandate for the assessment of refugees and well-being and physical health. Second of all, we participate in the development of recommendations based on best practices. So one of our main roles is to make recommendations to the Ministry of Health. And also we try to contribute to the development and dissemination of Quebec expertise on topics related to refugees and asylum seekers. So how does it translate it in real life? So we have action based on 4 strategic axes. First of all, connection of actors. We try to foster exchanges between the different actors in the field, as well as the relationship with us, in order to stimulate the exchange of expertise. So we usually organize meetings with the 14 teams. We organize, conferences just like this one with stakeholders in the field. We try also to orient practices, just like I told you, with recommendations to the Ministry of Health, but also by creating tools based on the state of the scientific knowledge. So I'll present you a little bit further some tools we created. Knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer are the activities that you will see the most with us. So we do some comic strips. We do a lot of webinars. So usually that's the ads and that you're going to see. That with knowledge transfer are the main activities you will see on our website. So this is our kind of, this is what you will see the most of us. And knowledge production and support. So we try to contribute to the development of Quebec expertise by supporting the emergence of innovative practices, just like we give some grants and some scholarships to students and to stakeholders on the field that try to develop some projects. So those are the 14 teams all across Quebec that gave the assessment to resettle refugees. So as you can see, they are almost all over Quebec, from Gatineau to Rimouski. Challenges faced by healthcare professionals. So just like I told you before, it's going to be a quick overview. We don't have much time, so we won't be able to, to go deep down in the challenges, but it's a quick overview of what you may face as a healthcare professional. So language barrier. Language barrier is one of the main barriers faced by refugees, by asylum seekers, and by lots of immigrants too. And that can prevent access to healthcare services. And when you have access to healthcare services, that doesn't mean it's not a barrier anymore. As a practitioner, you might, because of the language barrier, misdiagnose. You could have difficulties to understand symptoms, and you can have also challenges in working with interpreters. And as a healthcare professional, you can have also lack of time. So we all know that it can be you can be in a hurry very often as a healthcare professional. So you might like lack of time, but this is very important when you know that you have someone that is a refugee or that is an asylum seeker, to take the time to listen, even though you lack of time. You have to take this time to listen and to explain the process of the meeting and what's going to be done, etc. Yeah, and if you want to.
And give and allow some time for, of course, question and people being able to understand what's really happening. And also one of the structural challenges working in context of institutional violence, meaning like the immigration process for asylum seekers, there is a risk of re-traumatization by society, by refusals, things like that. Also, they can face racism, etc. within the institution. So it's a challenge to work in a country that it will be ambivalent for them. They're looking for sometimes help, but they are at risk of not being trusted and things like that. Another challenge is, especially for refugees, asylum seekers, but not only, is overburden external resources. It's difficult to make referrals. Sometimes health professionals has to do more things because they know people will not be referred. There's not enough psychologists. Sometimes it's not easy to find medical doctors, social workers, etc. So it's difficult, and sometimes it's feeling difficult to work like in a network. One of the other challenge is the issue of trust in the relation with health professionals. So as I talked a bit before, the ambivalent and a possible fear of institutions. So sometimes looking for help, but also having bad experiences with institutions. Some people went to hospital, but have been like tortured there. So, so it's changing the representation of what could be a professional and why trusting when you had experience of a very terrible experience within institution. That will be taking time and also building the trust. One of the other fear that could be is that some people might don't want to talk about a health issue because they think it could interfere with the immigration process. I've heard things like, oh, but if they discover I have that, will they still give me the asylum? I've heard also that saying, okay, I don't want to talk of what happened there because it's not in my story, so I don't want for the moment to go there. So, because they don't have like a social safety, it could be more difficult to really get the information, and this imposed narrative that they had to build for immigration, it's of course doesn't sum up all the complexity of their journeys. The other thing about trust is the effect of trauma on the relationship. That of course, like having an experience of interpersonal or more political violence, it's lack of trust. But also the other part is to protect the health professional, that they can be a bit thinking, I don't want to expose this story to you. I want to protect you for sharing terrible stories. Then if we talk more about the cultural issues, will be to build this kind of trust, like to provide also cultural safety. So people feel safe enough to talk, to share, and not only safe enough like in the relationship, but also that they can talk about their environment, their symbolic words. So really being open for that. And of course, to provide cultural safety, it's also question our clinical positionality, who we are, what are the historical position, the geopolitical things that can happen in between like communities. So it's important to be aware of it and to discuss a bit all the representation we can have. About the multiple representation system, is like some people will have more explanation based on their religion, things like that. So being open to listen to different explanation, for example, of the symptoms that are presenting, that might be different. And the last part will be to be aware that there is discrimination in health services. So even if it's not, for example, in your office, it can happen before, it can happen at many parts, and that is influencing the relationship, the fact that people are experiencing discrimination and racism also in health services.
We're telling you this about also just to be aware of maybe your own biases, that it exists. There are lots of articles in the scientific literature that talk about discrimination amongst, sometimes some doctors, some psychiatrists, some psychologists. So just be aware that it can exist, and just maybe try to, be aware of maybe your own biases.
So then for the professional, the main issue will be sometimes a lack of training, not a lot of training for a question of refugees or migrants in general, and some isolation of professionals. So it's not so easy, as I said, it's overburdened to work in networks. So it could be like a lot of isolation of professional. Sometimes it's complex cases in the sense of you can have, for example, the psychological effect of trauma or other things, but then there is also the social process that they're going through. And so there is like psychosocial and different, of course, making the case sometimes more complicated. The vicarious trauma is important. We said it's important to talk about it. So to be aware of what is happening, to listen to a people's story that could be complicated with trauma, and just being aware of our reaction, because sometimes this vicarious trauma can be that at the end, we're not able to provide good services because we're not able to listen anymore. Like it's very important to listen to ourselves, to see what's can be changing when we work in this kind of setting. And we wanted to give a very brief clinical illustration. It's of course it was more complex, but just a little brief illustration, just to show how sometimes we name things, the psychological aspect, but also how the social aspect is important. So it was a single parent applying for asylum in Quebec, and she has 2 young children and a teenager, and she works in the field of personal care in private residence. She's been referred because she has some suicidal ideation, and people said that she's depressed. So of course, in Quebec, there is a significant social isolation. She's not really in contact with any people, but she stays in contact with people in her home country. So she kind of have a network, but not, people to talk face to face. She, of course, struggling. She's not like in a very happy mood, but there is no sign of major depression. So, but when she's talking about why she's looking for asylum, she said, I want to protect my children from civil war. I will do anything for them not to go back. And about suicide, she said, well, I think if I kill myself, Quebec will take care of my children and I will manage to get what I want, them to be safe from the war. And she's like, I don't want to kill myself at all. I just want them not to die more than me. So that was kind of really not a lack of solution or not really having hope. It was more a strategy of survival. And that was very important. And after, hopefully, she got granted asylum, and she didn't have suicidal ideation, like other things, some modalities, things like that. But really, that was connecting to the social situation. So I think it's important that sometimes, like, we refer for psychological things, to always have the broader context where people are, and to listen of what they mean by that.
So we're going to talk about, again, a quick overview on we're going to give you a few keys that you might put in practice. Obviously, you will have to maybe look for other resources to go a bit deeper in those keys, but how to have a practice sensitive to the realities of refugees and asylum seekers. So what you could do as a healthcare professional when you receive someone in your office. So some key steps, some of them are inspired by by our webinars. We do a lot of webinars with healthcare professionals, and they always share some keys to put in practice. So first of all, explain your role. It is very important to explain your role, as a psychologist, as a psychiatrist, as a nurse, as a doctor, and the concept of confidentiality. Really reassure the person on who you are and the fact that what she is saying to you is confidential. Listening and recognizing differences with respect. Again, there are different cultures, different ways of approaching certain matters. So just try to listen and recognize differences. Use a formal interpreter. You will have sometimes informal interpreters, which can be children, which can be friends, which can be the husband or the wife. Really, as much as you can, try to use a formal interpreter, because they are trying to do this and they have experience, and it will be better for you and for your assessment. Always, always, always assess and detail the migration history. I think one of our presenters in our webinar she's a social worker. She almost spent the whole webinar on this, because it is very important to, just like Jan told you about, you have to understand the history, you have to understand the motives, and you have to understand, it will help you in your diagnosis to really assess and detail the migration history. Increase the frequency of meetings and allow for extra times. One of the psychiatrists that were presenting for us was telling us that she was doing much shorter sessions, but more often. So it's a strategy. You don't have to do it all the time, but just be aware that sometimes you have to take the extra time, just like I was telling you before. Take a step back from medical history and treatment. Don't hesitate to reevaluate certain diagnoses or medications, even if the person is telling you, oh, I have this and I'm taking this. Don't hesitate to ask questions and to evaluate, because sometimes some people didn't see doctors or nurses or psychologists or psychiatrists for years before, because they were in refugee camps or transit countries. So don't hesitate to evaluate. Pay attention to all undiagnosed childhood and congenital diseases. Approach mental health with a focus on somatic symptoms. I think the clinical case that Jan presented you illustrates well this point. Mental health or stress and anxiety doesn't mean the same thing across different cultures, and the way of expressing it can vary very widely. So approach mental health with focus on somatic symptoms. Take the time to explain the healthcare system. It's very important. Healthcare systems are very different across countries, so always take the time. One example that one of the presenters was telling us was, for instance, the renewal of medication at the pharmacy. Some details are going to seem very basic to you because you've been born here or you spend here lots of years, but you have to explain them to the person. Being creative, local solutions and partnerships. Jan will tell you about this point a little bit further, but you can be creative and prepare for the end of the meeting. One psychologist was telling us that he was always taking 5 minutes before the end of the meeting just to have a buffer because the person had shared, some very sometimes difficult details of her life. So to have this buffer of 5 minutes was really helping the person feeling considerate and feeling taken into account. For taking care of yourself as a healthcare professional.
So what we can do, what is very important, is not to stay alone. So of course, supervision, and we talk about vicarious trauma. So supervision is extra important, and to have different views and to help process those kind of work. Allocate time for training, because as we said, there is sometimes not a lot of training about this subject in informal, for example, in psychology. So it's important to allocate time for specific trainings. Developing partnership, working in networks, so not to be alone, that the second part of it. So it's super important for us, super important also for our patients. We can see that we're working in the networks, and it's very reassuring to say, for example, oh, I know this social worker, I know this person, and the person are very reassured, to create those kind of networks and support.
Yeah, I would add, for instance, it's after a meeting, you don't feel good, or you have some, I don't know, you don't hesitate to talk about it with one of your colleagues, of course, in confidentiality, but to share your feelings, to share your emotions to one of your colleagues. This is working in partnership in networks, but that's one other thing you could do.
Another thing we wanted to highlight is all the opportunities, because we sometimes talk about the challenging, that is not easy, but it's also, and I will insist for everyone who wants to work in this field, that's also a very important and great field full of opportunities. So of course, it's people who suffered many things, but also have exceptional journeys, and it's human encounters that are in exceptional context and kind of very important. And as a psychologist, I'm witnessing very precious stories when people are suffering for political oppression. They don't often have the rights or the possibility to tell their stories in one of their community and family. So I feel it's always very precious to get those stories and have the opportunity for that. What I liked also, it's all the creativities. When some people say, oh, I never heard what a psychologist is doing, what kind of work we can do, is to try to renegotiate and create together what kind of, how do you want to work together? What are your hope? What are your expectations? Things like that. And it's all more creativity that some people who have pre-write and kind of script of what is a therapeutic relationship. The process of trust, that trust is a process. So it's also, I think, allowing a lot of creativity in there. And of course, it's a clinic that is rich in diversity. So it's many different aspects of this work.
Last but not least, some resources for you as practitioners. So our website, CERTA, we tried to build a website where you will be able to find lots of tools, lots of resources from us, but also from other organizations, other institutions. We try to relay and to concentrate in this website all the information or tools you could find in Quebec, but we also have some tools from Ontario also. So honestly, just go have a look, just take the time just to dig up into our website, because honestly, there are lots of tools. One of the toolkit, I was telling you before that we created some tools, and we are creating some tools right now. We created a toolkit to support intervention with asylum seekers. In this toolkit, you will find a guide for you that explains not everything, but honestly, lots of things that explain, the IFHP, the coverage of IFHP, that explain the whole process of the asylum process, that explain PRIDA services and how they work, that explain lots of things. You have also access to 7 video clips of experts. So the videos are between 5 to 8 minutes. And you've got psychiatrists, you've got doctors. So you just go have a look to see. And we created summary sheets that are in 4 languages, in French, English, Spanish, and Arabic. So you can give those summary sheets to asylum seekers. And the summary sheets summarize some resources that they can have access to, and lots of things. So we created this tool. And if you work with asylum seekers, I would strongly advise you to go have a look at it. Also resources, we have lots of webinars. with lots of practitioners, doctors. Some webinars, for instance, from Lavanya Nahazia. She gives you a lot of keys, and she calls them pearls of practice. And it's very, honestly, I love her webinars and all of our webinars, because you will find a lot of tools for you as a practitioner in them. We create also summary. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, just to tell you have 5 minutes remaining.
Perfect. I will need less than 5 minutes. Summary sheets and infographics, we create a lot of them. So what we do is we take scientific articles, and we know that as practitioners, you don't always have time to read scientific articles. So what we do is we create, first of all, a summary sheet of maybe 2 to 3 pages, and then of the same article, we try to create another way for you to gain knowledge with an infographic. So it's only 1 page and it's a lot of images. So I just gave you 2 examples of what we do. And we also have video clips. We also have comic strips in several languages. We have some comic strips in 10 languages for asylum seekers and refugees, for children. We also relay some online trainings. We didn't do online trainings, but as I told you, we relay some. So if you go to our website, you will have access to online trainings on refugees and asylum seekers. And again, we are a platform that relay all the tools. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your talk and for coming today, both of you. There are actually a few questions in the chat. If you want to read them, can you see the chat?
Yeah, just stop my share. To share screen. Should we go all over to the top?
There are 3. There are 3. Yeah, if you just
3. Okay.
Messages, yes. For self-employed physicians.
Yeah, I'm going to start with this. Yeah, for self-employed physicians, for instance, we are not government employees on salaries. Okay, our income is dependent on how many patients we see each day, for the most part. So taking more time for patients is really not what most physicians will be inclined to do. Questions for later. When will Rivo resume its activities of taking new referrals? During COVID, it has not been taking referrals. Yeah, and I think it's for you as well.
Yeah, for Rivo, I know there is a long waiting list. It's actually a problem. I know that it's more the administrative part, but I can try to answer. Now we're trying to reduce to 20 sessions, but I think it's the time, the less time we can have to try to help with this waiting list. I know I took some referrals during the pandemic. But then I'm the last step. There is like social worker before and things like that. Yeah, Rivo is looking for more psychotherapists, people who are interested. And I think, yeah, there is not a lot of full-time psychotherapists for Rivo. It makes it difficult to deal with the waiting list, which is a real problem because of course, when people come 6-7 months later, they're way different. Like they find other solutions, sometimes very good solutions, sometimes less good solutions to cope with what's happening. So yeah, it's and I think it's an issue in many places, the waiting list for especially for refugees, what I'm hearing.
Another question is, in Montreal and South Shore, do you have descriptions of clinics providing mostly asylum seeker care? For instance, CEDAR, Dr. Narazia's clinic, the structural criteria for functioning properly. So I'm not sure if it will answer your questions, but I know that in the guide, we have gathered lots of resources that asylum seekers can go to have healthcare services. So again, I would advise you to go on our website. It's all in it. The structural criteria for functioning properly. I'm not sure I understand the questions, but is it the criteria to receive services? I see.
Hi, this is Dr. Chirgwin. It's mostly to try and understand, like, what does it take for a clinic to be able to provide services to asylum seekers, mostly having to do with getting the proper funding and being able to get an interdisciplinary team, like, for example, a social worker, a nurse, a physician, and especially, for example, I work in a CLSC. A lot of the employees, they have allotted times to what they can give for specific activities. So a nurse and a social worker who love to see asylum seekers, well, they're not allowed to, because they're not authorized to just do things of their own free will. Whereas a physician does have that ability. So these clinics are difficult to set up, and I was just wondering if you would comment on the clinics that you are aware of, like Cedar and Dr. Narasia's clinic. What did it take in order to build those clinics and to maintain them?
Wow, that's a broad topic. I think that we really need another presentation, but you raise a very good point. First of all, I was saying you about the 14 teams that have been created that we call clinics also, that receive refugees. They receive specific fundings from the government, from the provincial government. Asylum seekers, it's more the federal government. So I think to get some fundings, you maybe need to go to the federal government, but they have been specifically created because it was, the policy of Quebec. But for asylum seekers, I know that it's very complicated. There are lots of barriers to access to healthcare services, even though they are covered with IFHP. And I didn't enter into the details in this presentation because it's huge, but to first of all, physicians or nurses or doctors have to be registered to Croix Bleue Médavie. Croix Bleue Médavie being the insurance that covers, they are the intermediary, I would say, between the federal government and the healthcare services. So they are the one that reimburse the practitioners. But to be reimbursed as a practitioner, you have to be registered. So as an asylum seeker, if you don't want to pay the services you're going to receive, you have to be sure that the person you're seeing is registered to Croix Bleue Médavie. What we're seeing on the field is that asylum seekers, sometimes go to a practitioner, receive services, and then the services or the hospital send them an income. And sometimes because they were not aware that the practitioner was not registered to Croix Bleue Médavie, or sometimes because the hospital do not know that they are covered by the IFHP. There are a lack of knowledge on the field of the IFHP. This is one of the main barriers. And one thing very important maybe for you to know, and for the asylum seekers, is never pay the income before, because once you've paid the income, you won't be able to be reimbursed, even though the practitioner is registered. So if the practitioner is registered and I don't know, the hospital still sends you an income and the asylum seeker pays for the income, the person won't be reimbursed, even though the person is covered. So it's a very complicated topic, and how to get fundings for people. We're working on it at CELDA. We're working right now with the Ministry of Health to try to create an assessment just like refugees have. We're working on it right now to create orientations and to create some, I don't know the word in English, but anyway, we're trying to build it right now with Lavanya, with Dr. Narasia, with lots of doctors. So we're working on it, and I know it's a very huge topic, because the barriers that asylum seekers face, huge topic. But just know that as a professional, you have to be registered at Croix Bleue Médavie. So if you can do it, honestly, please do it for them, so they can receive subsidy.
Well, thank you very much. I think those were all the questions. Thank you so much for coming today and for giving this talk. It was really informative, and also for giving access to the resources on cerda.info that seem to be really interesting, like the guide and the summary sheets. So we'll now proceed to a little break of 5 minutes, because we've been going since this morning. So we're going to give you guys a little break of 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little Kahoot session. And just to tell you that if you want to be eligible for the certification, to make sure to stay for that Kahoot, that nothing counts, it's just to see what we learned today and try to remember some important points and, play a little game together. And don't forget to fill the little form that Sukaina posted in the chat. So your feedback is really important for us. But yes, I'll mute, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. So at 11:38. And we are back. Sukaina, do you want to share your screen? Thank you. So hopefully everybody is back. So just before doing the Kahoot, I just wanted to talk a little bit about who is CIME. So who are we? CIME is an acronym for Collaboration Interprofessionelle Montréalaise Étudiante. And we are a group of students a group of students here from different healthcare professions, so medical students, nursing students, dietetic students, and social work students who work together to provide different services to asylum seekers. We are mainly based at Parc Extension, and we offer two types of services at the time, such as healthcare navigation sessions. It's like one-on-one navigation sessions with asylum seekers to help them build a portfolio, like a passport, a health passport, and tell them what their resources are, as well as workshops that are informative about health and to try and demystify some information on health and make it accessible to asylum seekers here in Montreal that we have contact with. And obviously creating this this symposium with the help of many students that are participating. So we're gonna start the Kahoot session. So Kaina will put the link in the chat. It's just this link, so you can type it in kahoot.it, and we're gonna be sharing and going through the questions together. Once you get on the website, they will ask you for a PIN, and we'll be able to see it in a few seconds. The PIN will be given to you. So here's the PIN. So we're 50 on the Zoom, so you. You don't see the PIN? I'll put it in the chat. Some people don't see the PIN, so I'll put it in the chat. So it's 1296220. You can enter it. Yeah, there's no space. Thank you, Alyssa. Perfect. Should we start? When do you want to start, Sukaina? When we reach 45? Maybe give a little bit more time.
Let's give like 1 more minute or 2 more minutes.
I love music. Yeah, let's give 1 or 2 minutes.
Let me know when you're ready, Amina.
I am, and I think there won't be any more participants because once you start, they can join. Oh, okay. And you can, I think, unmute yourself, Sukaina, even if you're not gonna talk, because there's like the music that plays.
Oh, yeah, okay, perfect. Oh,
Yes, so that's a statistic, but it's just to show how many people are actually displaced worldwide. And it was during the first talk today, and it was said that 2/3 were internally displaced, while 1/3 of that were considered refugees, and 1/3 of 75 million is 25 million. So that's a really, really big number of people that are being refugees.
do we move to the next one?
Next one, please.
Yes, let's go. Oh, most people got it right.
Yes, 40%. And which is, like, when you think about it, 40% is a really big number, because, and just because we're talking about children and how it's important to have stability when you're a child to be able to, you know, evolve and grow up. And it's just to construct yourself as a person. And these people are living in such instability, being refugees, going to countries, and, you know, being difficult. And sometimes it takes so many times before they actually settle. It's so long before they actually settle. So that's all a lot of distress on children, and 40% is a significant number.
Okay, let's move to the next one.
Yes.
Oh, Dana is coming up. Okay, next question. Great job.
Good job, everybody. And one of the reasons, as it was said in the talks earlier, is because, well, Turkey has borders with countries that are at war, such as Syria, which is the top one country right now that has refugees, people fleeing the country. So it's normal that they'll go to the nearest place, which is Turkey at the moment. So we can see that it has an impact on all surrounding countries when there's war in the country, or when it's dangerous to live there.
Okay, let's move to the next question.
Dana was dethroned.
Oh, we have like almost a tie.
Yes. So maybe because we get mixed up between refugee and asylum seeker, but once you are a refugee, you are eligible for, you have full coverage with the RAMQ. But when you're an asylum seeker, no, you don't. You have access to other resources through other programs, like the IFHP, like we talked about today. I think I spoiled the question. Anyways, so we can go to the next question now.
Oh, Marie is still on the top.
But Dana is on a streak.
Yeah. Okay, this one is a multi-select, so there is multiple good answers. Okay.
Yeah.
I plan to interpret this results. Can you lead us with that?
Well, most people got it right, actually, because it's the right answers are the Canadian Border Service at the border, and the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. So 26 and 25 people. Sometimes they took both. But no, a lot of people think that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is a place to make a refugee claim, but that is not the case. So these are really the two places where you can make a refugee claim.
So we're gonna move to the next one.
Another multi-select question. So
Yes. Yes, most people got it right.
exactly. So we saw earlier that RAMQ is not something available for asylum seekers, but IFHB is. Rivo, that we had people from there today, like Jan and Prida, which like Dr. Sherwin talked about, the services are optional, but they are offered to asylum seekers if they wish.
Yes. Still, Marie is on the top.
Last question, and it's a multi-select.
Oh, wow. Well, actually, like all of these are barriers that they face. And this question is kind of tricky because it has the word structural, so it's very picky from the PowerPoint slides. But yeah, basically the two right answers are language barriers and difficulty to follow up. But all of you guys are technically right because all of these are barriers they actually face. So are we ready to see who's the winners? Oh, félicitations, Elena. And Marie! Congratulations to you all. And runner-up Lina and Kariman. Ah, Lina. Okay, so we're over. This is over. We're just gonna share our screen for the last time for the PowerPoint slides. I promise you it's gonna be very short. It went into the first page. Let me go back. Okay.
Yes. So yes, again, last reminder, your feedback is important. So please fill the form that was sent. If you don't find the form, you can just message us or click on the chat right now and we'll send it to you again. This form is used to just make you eligible to win a 25 gift card of your choice. We will be posting the winner. It's a raffle, so it's randomized. The winner on the Facebook page event, and contacting that person personally as well. So best of luck to everyone on this little raffle. And next slide, please. Yes, so today this brings today's seminars, multiple talks to an end, and we are still going to go for another 4 weeks. So next week we have different subjects that we're talking about. Today it was more introductory and getting to know a little bit the population we're talking about and the services a little bit more general offered to them. And next time we'll talk about health, more about health challenges, about nutritional challenges faced by migrants, because food security is really important, and also language barriers that we touched upon today, but we'll have a little bit more, we'll talk a little bit more about it. And as well, at the beginning, I did share a little, I shared a form for people who will be here next week. And if you want to register for next week and you didn't the first time when you registered, I think it's still possible to register. Just what would be the best way, Sukaina, for the people that are here right now?
Yeah, so but definitely, if you haven't registered for week 2 and you wish to, you can go on our event page and you can register for today's event. And as well, just make sure if you are registered to again fill the form that we send you guys in the beginning to just register for the workshop that will be had by Medcom. So
because at the beginning, I feel like maybe some people were not connected.
yeah. I just sent it right now. Like I sent the form. For like the last form I just sent is the one with the like the form for the workshop, and I think you also sent it just right now.
It's the same, guys. It's the same form.
Yeah, it's the same form, so it's not two form, and it's only 2 minutes. Like it's very short, and we just really again just want to know like the language you're speaking, so we can place you in appropriate group. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for your participation, and we hope to see you next time. I'll stop sharing. If you guys have any other question with regards to the event or anything else, we are more happy to stay here and answer your questions or have any of your comments or feedback. And thank you so much once again for being here today. It was really amazing.
Also for like the slides that they wanted, I remember it was for Mrs. Denise Otis's talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, what do you think is the best way to share it with the
I think we can either email it or we could yeah, I think it's better if we can email it.
Email it? Okay. Yeah, it's a good idea.
We register for week 1. Do we have to register again for the Zoom link for week 2? If you have registered for week 1 and week 2, you are good to go. Like you already registered. But if you haven't registered when you first registered for the event for week 2, you have to go and register, or just let me know. Send me a message and I'll check for you and let you know if everything is.
On the main form, it gave you like the option to register for everything at once. So if you didn't pick the week 2, then you are not registered for it. But we can put you on the list if you want.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'll go check like earlier. I'll just take your name and I'll message you if ever I didn't have your registration.
Are we going to be sharing the slides for like the other talks?
Sharing, we can potentially also do that.
Like I guess we can email them.
Yeah, exactly. A drive. We could have like a drive and then just email it, and I think it would be perfect.
And put it like how do you call like not